Just briefly about me, Peter Fisher. I'm from Salt Lake City. I lived in Salt Lake City. I grew up there. I went to school there. And when I was in medical school in Salt Lake is when I met Steve Gange. I really decided to be a urologist, a lot from his example. And I'm always grateful for that. Then we became partners and have enjoyed a really great practice together. I'm in my 15th year. Can you believe that? I want to share an experience with you this morning about burnout. I never considered myself of any sort of, and still don't consider myself an expert on burnout. So I'm going to make you a promise. I will not should all over you. I just want to share with you an experience because it changed me and it changed my outlook on life. But the changes were very subtle. Because what happened to me in my life-changing experience is this sort of shifting right in the middle of my career. And if I could tell you kind of in summary what this shifting is about, it's that last statement. I hope that in sharing what I learned through this experience, we can be more integrated and less individual, more committed and less comparative. March 15, 2008, 3.5 years ago, roughly, I died on a basketball court. I had a condition called sudden cardiac death because it comes on without any warning. I was playing defense in a 2-3 zone in a competitive basketball game, and having sudden cardiac arrest or sudden cardiac death is like being hit with a sniper rifle. I never knew it was coming. I didn't have any symptoms of it happening. I shifted on that defensive play, rose up on my toes, and postured with my hands down at my side and fell flat to my face. I'm going to go into this in a little bit of detail because the story of that 11 minutes where I was pulseless is still very moving to me, and I think it resonates with doctors because you've all heard of people who've suddenly died. Usually they're guys who just retired. Have you noticed that? Nobody wants to retire in our practices because you have these stories of guys who retire and suddenly die. But this happened to me at age 45. I was pulseless for 11 minutes and received CPR there on site. EMS arrived 10 minutes after their call, after the 911 call was done. And then I was in the hospital. I was ICU to home in 3 nights. I was at cath lab 90 minutes after my arrest. This picture on the right side of the screen is the printout from the AED that was placed on me 6 minutes into my arrest. And I'll tell you, I'll go into that in a little more detail. Between 6:41 and 6:47 p.m. on the 18th is when I was essentially flatlined. These 4 guys, one of them my teammates, 2 of them referees at the game, and one a spectator, saw me go down and waited for me to convulse for a bit, thinking that I'd had a seizure, rolled me over. One of those 4 was trained in CPR, had a card actually. He was the spectator and he came out of the audience and he saw me on the ground. When they rolled me over, I was face down and I'd broken my nose on that fall and had a gash. And he thought, sorry, let me back up. I was so fascinated after surviving this because survivability is so rare. I went and interviewed these men individually, and it's still moving for me to tell you about that, about those interviews. None of them wanted to talk about it. All of them were exquisitely emotional in remembering that time. But I pressed them to find out why they did what they did. And that's where I get this information. So they rolled me over. The guy who came from the audience, he said, "Man, that's a pretty good gash on his nose. I'm surprised it's not bleeding." Oh, it probably should be bleeding. And he was the first guy to check if he's breathing. I wasn't breathing, and then they called 911 and started CPR. One guy, Ryan Blankenship, was a center on our basketball team. He's 6'8", 285 pounds. and a sweet, quiet guy with really an aggressive left-handed move to the hoop. But he did the lion's share of CPR on my chest. After they'd done it for 6 minutes, these men in rotation, then two other guys joined them. One of them was living in the neighborhood and heard the 911 call. He was an off-duty fireman and had an AED in his car. He put the AED on my chest, one pad on the front, one pad on the back, and turned it on. And AEDs, if you haven't run one, you should in some practice. It's very easy. Or you can, learn about it as these guys did on the fly. It gives you verbal cues. The AED says, "Don't touch patient," analyzing. And this is the printout. So they lay hands off. This is an EKG strip. You've all seen what an EKG looks like. Shoot, Andy's got one in his office. This is my EKG. And this is, take your pick. This is either flatlined or fine ventricular fibrillation. The prompts, if you can't read them from your seat, say, "Don't touch patient," analyzing. The next one says, "Shock advised." And then the next one says, "Press flashing shock button," which they did. And this is what defibrillation looks like. Now, the next few slides are pretty interesting. It says, "Restart CPR." There's a prompt there. These waveforms are not heart compressions. They are exactly kind of moving with my heart compressing with each of the CPR CPR chest compressions. This black line is the intensity of the compression, and this waveform is Ryan Blankenship's 285 pounds going up and down on my sternum. The sixth guy who arrived is a close friend, and he was sitting at my head, and he hadn't been there watching them do CPR for very long. And he said, before I had this printout, he said, "I watched Ryan Blankenship take his full form and press your sternum till I thought your chest would hit the hard court, till your sternum would hit the hard court. And the machine said, 'Push harder.'" And he did. And it said, "Good compression." And they kept going like that for another 2 minutes. If you want to know exactly what moment I came to life, I think this is it. This is 6:49 and 52 seconds to 51 seconds. To 6:50 and 1 second, and this is 6:50 and 2 seconds. And somewhere right between here, these are starting to get some better QRS waveforms, but they are still going right in time pretty much with the chest compressions. And somewhere right in this transition, my heart starts going without those compressions, if you can see that difference. And there's a prompt that says, "Stop CPR." Sudden cardiac death carries roughly a 90% mortality rate, depending on how close you are to hospitals and healthcare and how quickly you get intervention. If you live, more than half of us who live, that's called sudden cardiac arrest because you don't die. If you die, it's death. Sudden cardiac arrest has a 95% morbidity rate because of the anoxic brain injury. We talk about the nuances of overall survival and prostate cancer and the diseases that we deal with in urology. Sudden cardiac death accounts for over 350,000 deaths annually in the United States. And it's different from a heart attack. I wish I could, I don't wish. I hope that if I'd had symptoms leading up to this, that I would have acted on them before it was too late. But I was symptomless. This hit me like a bolt of lightning. It was abrupt. It was painless. I was really worried about my memory. I had short-term memory loss early on. My wife would work patiently with me in those early days, not knowing what the state of my mind would be, and that was pretty scary for just about a week. And then I had about 3 months where I felt Ryan Blankenship's work on my chest and those broken ribs. So I put these, my life changed in that moment. And I want to tell you about how that changes. I'm hoping that in just telling you that experience from looking at my life before this event and looking at it afterwards, how does that make a difference? I think that's the message. To me, that's a message that's been really, really unburdening a lot of stress. And I revisit that, every Thanksgiving I think about what I'm thankful for. Can you imagine? Every one of my kids' birthdays and every significant event, I'm revisited by that. And so these changes certainly now seem to be always with me in lowering my stress level. I feel like they're preventing burnout in a lot of ways. And so I want to share these observations with you. When I was in the hospital, my first worry was financial. I know that might sound immature, but I think the vast majority of you would be right there. I was taken to an out-of-network hospital with my insurance, and it's silly, but as soon as I realized that, the panic was overwhelming. I demanded to be transferred hospitals from ER, throughout the whole hospital stay till they let me leave the ICU and go straight home. And I still had to battle with that out-of-network hospital for $72,000 out of pocket, and I'm fully insured. If you want to know what happened there, ultimately going through hospitals, I had to learn from Marty McRae. He's a price conscious physician, and I had to tell the hospital, you have no contract with me. How can you? There's only evidence that I wanted to leave, and you never had a contract to bill me. I'm afraid a lot of people get caught up in paying a lot of money in those network battles, and hopefully that's getting better. I was also worried about my wife. I knew that I was still partly dead. From the Princess Bride, he's only mostly dead. But I worried about those financial plans. I'm not a good financial planner. I don't do my own taxes. A few years before my arrest, we'd signed up with a financial planner. And enjoy a really great relationship. They focused with us first on a great foundation of insurance and of assigning where your wealth goes. And my wife called them the day after my arrest in the hospital, and because I was so nervous about when disability insurance kicks in and what do we even have and what policies do we sign up for. I was frantic about it, and these guys said, hey, we've got all that documentation. We've got it all. You just got to take care of you guys. And now, friends, as you might think, I'm completely uninsurable. And that insurance policy started before has been a great comfort to me. Observation number 2. Is that preventive health is also preparatory health. There was this sense of terrible irony. When I was on the floor and face down, the other team said, hey, isn't one of your guys a doctor? And my teammate said, yeah, the doctor is the guy on the ground. I give talks at Steve's leadership to our community, to businesses, to Utah Power and Light, or whoever wants to hear about men's health. And I practice what I preach. A year and a half, 2 years before I went down, 42, 43 years old, I had a full cardiac workup by a cardiologist. I had a stress test. My dad had his first bypass surgery in his 50s. That's basically my risk category, and I'm trying to be on top of it. I was told my blood work was fine. I didn't need to be on medication. My cholesterol level was still fine. I just got sniped. My cardiologist said, this is the holy grail of cardiology. If we could find, the reason this happens, the people that this happens to, and prevent it, it would be a game changer. So what's the point of prevention? I was kind of left there thinking to myself, some disease is inevitable, and physical health lends itself to a healthy recovery. But mental preparation also, I think, lends itself to coping. And that changed as I went through that experience. And then there's a question about life after death. I get asked this a lot. It's a fascination with us, right? We think about the perpetuality of our spirits and what happens in that experience. I'm often asked, what happened to you on that basketball court? Did you see anything? It's very difficult to describe. And as I've looked through a lot of accounts of people who've died, honestly, very little of it resonates with me. I didn't see a light, but I wasn't looking for one. I did see the scene of where I was, that sense that people talk about being pulled from your body. I had that. Ryan Blankenship, who I interviewed, that 6'8" guy crying in his living room, he said, I said, why didn't you stop? I mean, you'd been going at this for 5 minutes, which felt like 15, and nobody'd come yet. The ambulance that was supposed to be in our area was on another call and went to another, and so they had to call from a remote location to bring an ambulance in. It took them about 10 minutes to get there. And he said, I didn't stop because we had a moment. He said, I was pushing on your chest and you were lifeless, and then suddenly you turned your head and you looked at me, and I watched your pupils go from black circles and focus on me. And I said, I remember that. I remember that briefly. And he said, we saw that happen and we encouraged you to stick around, but then as soon as they stopped CPR, I had no blood pressure, and I felt that pulling away sensation and watched them resume. I remember that. There's two versions of life after death. There's the question of persisting intelligence, and that's a very individual experience. It's difficult to tell you what you think about or what you feel when you're in an out-of-body experience. For me, it was all about my kids and my wife and my responsibilities. And I felt a closeness with them that I can't really put into words. But I've been able to share with them on some aspects. The second version of life after death is a different way of living after dying, and then living again. And that's what I want to take the last 12 minutes and tell you about. This life after dying is better. It's not carefree, it's not work-free, but priorities shift, and there is a greater feeling of joy. The Michigan Challenge. I started to talk to my friends where I trained at the University of Michigan, and one guy said, hey, we talk about Michigan being the leaders and best, not because of a football thing. You need to write this down. You need to find the words to describe this, and then come back and tell us about it. And that's where this talk came from. And so as I think about it, I think everybody should experience sudden cardiac death and live. You have to live to know what this is like. Life before death tended to be ambitious and strategic and independent. And life after death is relational and intimate and relentlessly grateful. Observation number 3, projects don't define success, relationships define success. 12 years into practice, I was like a plate spinner. I was addicted to this praise of people saying, we need somebody to run our robotics committee. Oh my gosh, you would be so great with that. We need somebody to chair to be the head of surgery. We're opening a new hospital. We need a urology division chairman. You would be so great. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for doing this. That praise becomes a silent addiction. 12 years into practice, I had 7 leading roles. I was the chair of surgery at my hospital. I was the chair of a robotics committee at 2 hospitals. Was working in a number of other committees and so forth. And that stress was killing me. I didn't really recognize it. But that's how I was defining success. Success wasn't a financial goal. It wasn't about being a good doctor. It was about the body of work outside of my work. And some of you may experience that. Life after death, success is about joyful relationships. And for me, it changed in an instant. I used to call patients when I drive. Somebody talked about that yesterday. I used to call patients, and I used to call partners, and I used to strategize about our lithotripsy company, and I used to strategize about our hiring partners. Now when I drive, I call my brother. And I hope he doesn't answer his phone, so I can just leave him a message, tell him I was thinking about it. Or I call my parents. I took individual trips with my kids. I recognized immediately where I am wanted and where I am needed. Imagine you have the perfect excuse to get out of the projects that you hate. I had it. And all of these places where I was needed, where I was wanted to perform, and told them from the hospital bed, hey, I can't be the chair of surgery anymore. Hey, I can't be the robotics committee chairman anymore. Hey, I'm just not going to do that talk. I'm not going to speak for your pharmaceutical company anymore. I can't do it. This is what happened to me. They had me replaced in less than 10 days, each of those places. I immediately knew where I was wanted and where I was needed, and it was those places where I was needed that made the difference. If you want to know the best book that I read about life after death, it's not about life after death. It's this guy, David Brooks, and The Second Mountain. And I have a couple of quotes from that, because when I read this, these feelings started to describe how I felt in my core through this changing experience. He says, when I look back generally on the errors and failures and sins of my life, they tend to be failures of omission, failures to truly show up to the people who I've been close to. They tend to be sins of withdrawal, evasion, workaholism, conflict avoidance, failure to empathize, and failure to express myself openly. Good grief. Does that not sound like a bunch of overworked doctors? I feel terrible for people who die and live and find that they've been in the wrong marriage. That was luckily not the case with me. This is a picture of me and my sweet wife in our little getaway in the Albion Basin above Salt Lake City. And this quote, this quote I'll share with you. It's my favorite. Love itself is what is left over when being and loved has burned away, and is both an art and a fortunate accident. We have roots that grow towards each other underground, and when all the pretty blossoms have fallen off our branches, we find that we are one tree, not two. I think that's a reference to Hairline. Observation number 5, my wants and desires have shifted from independence to interdependence. I just cannot tell you how poignant that is. It's so subtle, but it is so unbelievably poignant. We do crave independence. Our community celebrates independence. Everybody gets the shake. You be you. You do it your way. Whatever you do is absolutely fine. Man, that may be fine with the world, but when I died and came back to life, all I wanted was to be connected. I did not want to be an independent entity. I just wanted those connections. And remembering that, it just feels better to just say it, to say that interdependence is better. Again, from David Brooks, suddenly they are not interested in they are not interested in what other people tell them what they want. They want to want the things that are truly worth wanting. That's got to be a hard sentence for him to write. They want to want the things that are truly worth wanting. That's what life after death feels like. They elevate their desires. The world tells them to want independence, but they want interdependence, to be enmeshed in a web of warm relationships. The world tells them to want individual freedom, but they want intimacy, responsibility, and commitment. Observation number 6, comparison is the robber of joy. Good grief. I can't tell you what it's like to suddenly be stripped of the need to compare yourself with other people. But it was enormously freeing. Essentially, my friends, for me anyway, work doesn't change. This is what drives me crazy about the philosophy of burnout, that you have to slow down your work. I don't have the right tools to do that. I still have to take call. I still have to see patients. I'm trying to figure out ways to pace myself in a healthy way. But it's the job, and I love that job. Yeah, I add on a stone at the end of the day because a neighbor calls, or the second cousin of a patient who I took care of, who has somebody with a 6 millimeter obstructing stone, and I add it on. I mean, it's what we do. But life before death was under a set of constant comparisons. I compared myself to you guys. I loved Dr. Gange and his adjuvant workload, and I admire that in putting on a meeting like this. Dr. Branton, I don't know if he's here, his surgical mastery. Caputo, my partner, I put on confidence, but honestly, it's more his good looks and swarthiness. Life after death, I'm suddenly content with my direction and my rate of succeeding. That's a patience component that I didn't have before. I accept who I am and where I stand without comparison. I feel like being on a path is just as good as getting to a destination. Teaching after death, we talked about this briefly last night. I only have a couple of brief experiences teaching residents, and then I got kicked out of the program for being too mean. The residents, when I have someone come and see me who's a family practice resident, I think I'm the nicest guy in the world. You want to come late, you want to leave early, that's great. Observe something, learn what you want. It's, you get to, honestly, in that case, you get to do you. I'm just showing you what I do. But when I was in front of urology residents, I felt like I have to teach you how to be me. And that's not easy. And you better button up and put your seatbelt on, because I'm not going to be easy on you. Through my teaching was really hard, and I hated the people who taught me until I was 5 years into practice and realized that if I had not learned to establish a better foundation, their foundation of what was excellent, that I would not be as good a practitioner of my craft. Accepting mediocrity is not the medicine for imperfection. Life after death shifts from venting frustration and finding blame to honesty, patience, long-term gains, and openly sharing vulnerability. Openly and directly address imperfection is the observation I came up with. Listening after death, you'll have to grab this quote from my slides, but I'm still not a good listener. I just have a better goal of how to be a better listener. And this is a great Buddhist quote about deep listening. Observation number 9, success equation flipped. And I'm going to take 2 minutes to tell you about this because it's important to me. Life before death was indestructible, concealed weakness, and hiding failures. I felt like if I wanted to get something, I could work and determine over and over again until I achieved that. There was nothing that I couldn't find. That all shifted when all of a sudden my vulnerability was open to the world, and patients and colleagues and Neighbors would all treat me initially with velvet gloves and recognize that I was completely vulnerable. That shifted for me. And then I found in that vulnerable this sense of warm relationships and joy. Vulnerability, we all know it at work. This is a guy with erectile dysfunction. You can tell him, you can treat him like a cheerleader or an educator or a skeptic. You got ED? Hey, everybody's got ED. We got cures for that. These are the medications for you. You're a bad smoker. You're overweight. You don't exercise. ED is the least of your problems. You know, we've all done that talk 1,000 times. Our problem with vulnerability is that we bring it home. Like my kid Mitch, who I sent to college in Arizona, and this is him at the Grand Canyon. You know, if Mitch calls me before death and says, Dad, I'm having a hard time making friends, I would fall right into those clinical models of the cheerleader. You can hear it, right? Come on, Mitch, you're great. People don't love you yet because they don't know you. Just be yourself. Keep plugging along. You're going to be awesome. We love you. Everybody's going to love you. Dad, I'm having a hard time making friends. The educator, and this is the one that we all do way too much. Mitch, you're shy, and you fall into yourself, and you've got to expand your horizons to make friends. In other words, you have to adopt my worldview to make your worldview better. Or the skeptic, Dad, I'm having a hard time making friends. And I tell my wife, I think our son's on drugs. I'm pretty sure he's completely on drugs. Instead, I found life after death. At work, I do those education models. At home, I advocate. Advocate means to add voice. At least I try to. I try and leave those education models away from the relationships that are meaningful to me, and I just try and add voice. Dad, I'm having a hard time making friends. Hey, I get that. I think that can be hard for everybody at a lot of different phases. What do you want to do about it? And try not to become his voice, and not try and take the place of his voice, and not try and stifle, good grief, not try and put down his voice, but to find a way to give him more voice. We measure our lives by the quality of our relationships and the quality of our service in those relationships. Life is a qualitative endeavor, not a quantitative one. I hope my life after death characterizes me as an advocate. And my last message for you is that I became vulnerable and found a profound view of those relationships and a shifting to somebody better than who I was. And you may get there. You may get divorced or jobless or houseless or homeless or face down on a basketball court. But if you can come through it, that vulnerability can give you tremendous strength. Thanks for your attention. Thanks for listening.